because that's the way I feel like when I'm working with you, is that I definitely get the sense that this guy's been in bands. I mean, because there's
Yeah.
that sense of like it's collaboration and it's, there's no sort of artifice or, elitism or none of that stuff. Or,
It's funny. I've never actually thought of it that way, but that's exactly right. When you have to just like put something together from scratch, which is a
yeah,
band. I mean, in high school, we were learning songs off the radio. We would sit down and together, and you play this part and you play this part. And, you're just kind of working it out. And so it really isn't that different from when you're sitting in a rehearsal room for an opera production. If everybody's on the same page and everybody's wanting to get a good product, it's not about one man being in charge. It's more about what can everyone bring to the table. Is that it is collaborative. Although I will admit that the guys in my band used to, my nickname was General Jim. That was kind of how I knew that, yeah, conducting probably is a good way to go. Am I there? I'm there.
hey,
How you doing? Do I
doing
have
good,
anything
dude.
embarrassing in my background? It looks like the bed is made.
No, you got some artwork back there. It's
Yeah,
very nice.
it's not
Very
so bad. A
fancy.
little lamp.
They really did it up nice to give you some wall decorations. It's not a plain
Yeah,
wall.
I mean, they know who I am.
Very
they're, they're
important.
not they're not messing around here at Gilmerglass. I said I need a, I don't know what it is though. It's like a circle and a couple other circles that are it's like part of the Olympic rings or something. I don't
I
know.
don't think Bob Ross made that. I was thinking like one of the things that struck me like when we first started hanging out was that you didn't strike me as the kind of guy or a kind of like guy who was in kindergarten with posters of Toscanini on his wall. There'd be a great conductor one
Yeah,
day.
absolutely, definitely not.
So I didn't
Yeah,
like you. I mean, you're wearing a Pink Floyd shirt, so I'm
yeah.
like,
So I grew up. I was actually pretty much a metalhead in high school. So
yeah.
I grew up. I played in a band called Tyrant. So that pretty much says it all.
Is there
Uh,
is there video?
I don't think there's video because
Probably
it was
VHS,
back before everybody was filming everything.
Betamax.
Yeah, right. There's audio. So I was the lead singer. I played some bass and I played keyboards for. I was kind of the Geddy Lee of Tyrant, I guess. And but we were like in high school. We were like it was kind of like a cover band. We played Judas Priest and Black Sabbath and stuff like that. And it was a really fun band. I mean, I did that for about 4.5, 5 years, all through
Yeah.
high school with the same guys. So it was really fun. So no, I had absolutely no dreams of being a conductor, let alone an opera conductor. That was the farthest thing from my mind at that time. And then I did go to college, but I went for piano.
Yeah.
So I was piano performance major. So then after graduating, I
Yeah.
formed a
Piano
jazz.
performance with an eye toward classical
Oh
piano.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
you were
I
gonna
was
be like
I was a
Van Cliburn. Let's go.
I was a classical piano major.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then what happened is after I finished, I went to Eastman and then Michigan. And after I finished my master's, then I formed another rock band, um,
They just keep dragging you back in.
which made my parents really proud that they had spent all that energy getting me through college. So I played for 5 years in a band called Backwash, and
Tyrant and Backwash.
yeah, for Backwash, I was the keyboard player and the lead singer. We were more of an original band, so we wrote
Yeah.
our own songs, and so I wrote a lot of songs with that band, and that was kind of, I'd call it alternative, but it was kind of like we had a heavy metal drummer, a jazz bass player, and a blues guitar
It
player,
was
and
the '90s, right?
it's just kind of it was like everything thrown in there together, and so we put out an album that did go very far. I found it on eBay for 99 cents once, so that was depressing. Uh, and we traveled around a lot. And then when I got to be in my reaching 30, I started to think, well, I better get a job. I better get something. So that's when I kind of morphed into the opera world, and
That's
I
really crazy that you took all that time away from it and it's like started like at 30.
yeah, absolutely. I'm blown away. Like when I'm in New York and I see people either on Broadway or in the opera world that are like 22 and know what they want to do,
Yeah.
it really amazes me.
Yeah.
like because that just wasn't my experience, that people that just say, I this is the thing I'm good at and this is the thing I want to do. So basically I had to take, when I think I was about 29, I took a year, um, and just I had to study languages. I had to study, you know what I mean? I kind of
Yeah.
realized
That's a lot of catch up.
yeah, it was a huge amount of catch up, and the only thing that saved me was my piano chops, because I was a classical piano major. I was
Yeah.
able to, that part of myself I could kind of sell and say, well, I can play the piano. So I went and auditioned for, actually the first thing I auditioned for was Marilla, and I did not get in. They were like, your languages and your opera rep at that time that is just non-existent, and so
Yeah,
they
but
actually
I
they
can
gave me
play Tom Sawyer. Is it not okay?
it's not right. I said, come on, I know
Really
some.
hard piece.
Yeah, that's not the rep I was supposed to know. And so they were actually really nice to me, and they gave me kind of an I got a letter of encouragement from Susan Webb, actually, who was at the time kind of working a lot with Marilla. And she said, you're a good pianist and you have everything in the right place. You just don't have any languages and you don't know any reps. So take some time. So I took a year. I took her advice, and I really kind of took some language classes and did some stuff. It still wasn't enough, but I caught up, and I got into the studio in HGO. So I got into the Houston studio, and that pretty much put me on a whole different path. So I joined the studio, and I spent 2 years there, and then I spent 5 more years on the staff.
Yeah.
So basically, after my 2 years in the studio, someone was kind enough to resign their job, and a job opened up, and so I jumped up into that, and I stayed on the music staff for another 5 years. So I was there a total of 7 years, and of course,
That'll fill in the gaps.
well, yeah, because
Yeah.
I had to. First of all, when I was in the studio at the time, they used to send everybody uh, to Europe to study languages. I
Yeah.
don't know if they do that anymore, but
I don't
at
think
the
so.
time, I spent a month in Florence and a month in Berlin, just kind of immersive, living with my teacher and just not speaking English for a month. I mean, it was incredible. And then of course, my opera rep just shot through the roof
Yeah.
because of just being there and being immersed in it and all of that. So it was, yeah, it pretty much changed everything for me
Do
in
you
that.
feel like being in like having those diverse musical interests and like being in a band, that sort of like collaboration that it takes to be in something like that really sort of influence? Because that's the way I feel like when I'm working with you, is that I definitely get the sense that this guy's been in bands. I mean, because
Yeah.
there's that sense of like it's collaboration and it's, there's no sort of artifice or, elitism or none of that stuff. It's just brass tacks and making the mechanics of the musical collaboration work.
It's funny. I've never actually thought of it that way, but that's exactly right. Is that like when you have to just like put something together from scratch, which is a
Yeah.
band. I mean, in high school, we were learning songs off the radio. We would sit down and together, and you play this part and you play this part, and you're just kind of working it out. And so it really isn't that different from when you're sitting in a rehearsal room for an opera production. If everybody's on the same page and everybody's wanting to get a good product, it's not about one man being in charge. It's more about what can everyone bring to the table. I mean, that's how I like to see it. Is that it is collaborative. Although I will admit that the guys in my band my nickname was General Jim. That was kind of how I knew that, yeah, conducting probably is a good way to go. Not it wasn't on purpose. It was just that's how
Well, it's sort of organic in a band. There's always one person that sort of is
yeah,
responsible for the musical sort of integrity of things.
yeah, I was
I mean, I
kind of
got
the,
this little
I mean, I
bluegrass
was
band, and it's the same way.
yeah, there's always one. Like I was always the guy to say, next we should practice this song.
Yeah.
That was just stuff like that, just like making the list, making the plan, making the all of that. Um,
Keeping the momentum going so people don't sort of
yeah,
like drift off
right.
and they're like,
Because
yeah,
otherwise we would jam for 3 hours and just never actually practice a song.
yeah,
So yeah, so that is the but I like what you said about the collaboration, because that's something I do try to really think about is, once you have a cast in place, my belief is in 3 weeks or 4 weeks, you're not going to change people that much, right?
yeah,
I mean, casting is the important thing.
yeah,
And once you've got the cast, you've got to trust them and say, what do you bring to the table? What do you have? Because because you can't just have an ideal in your head and come in and expect so and so to become that other person, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
So I will also say the other thing about playing in a band that makes a huge difference in anyone's life is that if you've toured with a band, if you've played in, you know, driven in a van and loaded your equipment and gotten to a biker bar, which is what we used to play a lot of, where there's like one outlet for all of you and you have to figure out how to plug in your equipment. If you get through that, there's nothing to complain about
yeah,
in an opera house. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like
yeah. No
musicians
one's
that are,
throwing. You're not playing behind chicken wire, and no one's throwing
yeah,
beer
no,
bottles at
I mean, I often see musicians or singers or things complain about very minor issues
you. Yeah,
about, you know, like, you know, I don't have enough light. I don't have, you know, things that are solvable really easily, but they'll complain about it. Or, you know, oh, I had to sit here and wait for 10 minutes before they called me to do my scene in rehearsal, or whatever things that people complain about. I always just think in the back of my head, you know, I wish you were with me in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, at that little bar, you know, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like loading my equipment back into the van at 3 in the morning.
yeah.
Like you would never ever complain about those things
That's
again.
that's one of the craziest things is like when the gig's over, the work is not over. You have
So
to pump all that stuff to heavy amps and
yeah.
you
So
know.
my band Backwash, we were based in Rochester, New
I
York.
can't get over that backwash. I like
Yeah, Backwash. Um, we were based in Rochester, New York, and we used to play Buffalo a lot. And Buffalo, the bars at the time, I don't know if they still do, but they stay open till 4.
whoa.
So we would play. I remember a couple of times we would play until 4 in the morning. Then you load out, and then you go to get breakfast because you're just, you know, it's 5 in the morning, and then we would drive about an hour back to Rochester while the sun was coming up.
Yeah.
And at the time I was teaching piano at 9 a.m. On Saturday mornings. So, but you know, I was like, you know, I was like 25. Like I
Yeah.
could do
You
that
can do that stuff.
now. I can't do that now.
I remember
But
like
yeah, the loading out after the gig is the worst because
it's
you're
similar when I'm talking to people who've never really didn't have to come up through the provinces in our country in the opera
right,
business
right.
like we did. Because I mean, until you're in some like nowhere town in the middle of Illinois, singing in a gym, a cafetorium, and singing Pagliacci, man. I mean, yeah, you may not have the nicest dressing room, but have you ever done this?
Right. I mean, if you're under those circumstances and you have to make it work somehow,
Yeah,
right? I mean, that's always the thing is that it's it's rarely ideal.
yeah,
You know, opera's hard no matter how you do it. It's rarely ideal, but when you're faced with those levels of challenges, then it's really about how do I make this work? You know what I mean? The acoustics aren't great, like you said, a gymatorium. I mean, whatever. You know, how do we balance this? How do we maybe sight lines aren't good? I mean, you know, okay, so this summer, since we're here at
yeah,
Glimmerglass,
yeah, yeah,
I mean, if people don't know this, obviously because of the pandemic, everything's changed. So Glimmerglass has this fantastic outdoor stage, and the orchestra is inside the theater
yeah.
on the stage of the usual opera house, and then you will be performing out on a stage on the lawn.
Hmm.
It's all piped in, right? We got an incredible sound guy. I've got 3 video screens, one in front of the stage and then 2 from the sides of the
It
stage.
looks like air traffic control up there. Where
Yeah, I
you
got like a little cockpit in
yeah,
there, you
yeah,
know, with the orchestra. But it's very weird. You know what I mean? It's
yeah,
it's very much. I mean, I've done remote stuff when you do musical theater. Sometimes the band is remote, and I've done a fair amount of studio recording where you might be in another room from
mm,
a singer or whatever. But it's still strange. Like there's no simple way to do it. And so when you overcome those challenges, you know, next time we all get into a normal pit with a proscenium stage, it's going to be so easy.
man. I mean, I think that those lessons that we learned in the trenches. I think a
Yeah.
lot of folks are learning like for the first time like this year with all the pandemic stuff and the different
Right.
pivots and things you had to make and doing these remote recordings and you really I mean I've always like whenever I go to a place where they have great facilities and you know, an incredible conductor and a great orchestra, and then you have like somebody out there taking notes, so you know, like, you know, you missed this phrase or this. I mean, that luxury alone, just having another set of ears that's out in the house checking your diction, checking to make sure you're getting every line right and everything, and sending you that. That's such a luxury that we just didn't have in those other places where you have to go on your own memory of what you screwed up during the day. And how do you remember that when you're in the moment, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you just said that about like someone taking notes out in the audience.
Yeah.
Like I've done so many gigs where you don't have an assistant, you don't have someone's ears out there,
Yeah.
which, you know, it's kind of essential, but it's amazing how often that's just is not the reality. And so in my case, I mean, I'm often trying to conduct with one hand while taking a post-it note on the other and stick, because, you know, I'm not going to remember that note at the end of the night. I think I will. You
Yeah.
know, oh, Mike Mays was late on beat 3.
Never happens.
Yeah, right. That one never happened. That was completely hypothetical. But you know, if I want to remember that, so you know, you're trying to conduct. You got the post-it notes, or sometimes I've got a pencil, but then I'm trying to write with my left hand and mark in the margin a little hashtag to remind myself at the end of the night. But then I have to sit there and go through all these post-its and try to figure out what they all mean.
I don't know how you guys. I mean, while you're actually, I mean, that's a testament to how well you have to know a score as a conductor. You know, you have to know everybody's part, and to be able to multitask. Because I mean, you know, it's the same problem you have as a singer or an actor. You're in the moment, and you have sort of an executive part of your brain that's up there taking notes. But in order to be sort of really in the moment, committed to that moment, it's really difficult to like split your brain in half and have your note taking side over there writing everything down, because you still have to keep going while your mind is in this moment that's 10 measures behind,
So
finishing up that, and you're going forward with the other part of your mind.
yeah, one of the best lessons I ever learned was Kathy Kelly, who I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
She taught me. So I was learning how to be a prompter. So this was kind of in my early, while I was at Houston on the staff, they wanted to have somebody prompt some shows. So they actually sent me to New York to study prompting with Kathy at the Met.
Yeah.
And she was talking to me about the process of prompting, which is, I hope I quote her right, but the basic idea was that I took away was that your brain has to be in 3 places at the same time.
Yeah.
Meaning you have to be ahead of the music, because when you're prompting is a preemptive art, right? You are saying the line before someone says it, which sounds easy at first, but when you think about if you have a string of lines going on, you're ahead. You're giving all of the lines and any visual cues ahead of the beat. So you have to live in that space. But then you also have to be on the beat to listen, did they do it right? Like you have to be aware of the evaluation of what happened. And then you also have to be a step after the beat, because you have to be able to fix whatever went wrong, right? So you have to be in those 3 places at the same time. However, the trick is those 3 places are now a different 3 places 1 beat later, and a different 3 places 1 beat later. So what was the pre-beat is now the, you know what I'm saying? And
yeah, it's like you're like an organist. You know, organists have to use all their, and drummers.
Yeah, it is like playing the organ. And so that to me, when she explained that to me, and then when I worked on it and I kind of got, and the key is, as you said, is you just have to know the score so well that you're not thinking about, is this a bar of 3/4? Is this you just can't even be there anymore.
Right. That's exactly how I feel when I'm in character. Like I'm really in character, I never count. And maybe it's a detriment sometimes, but it's because I don't want to be, I can't be fully in my skin if I'm counting. I mean, some scores just impossible, but that's why I do a lot of stuff with my body when I'm learning music, so that like it's a physical reaction. I know that impulse. I come in the next 8th.
That's great. That's exactly. I mean, I rarely in scores. I always mark like the oboe plays here. I'm very much right in my scores, but I rarely write time signatures like a giant, 3, 4. I do sometimes if I'm, but my feeling is if I don't know that well enough to not have to look down and see, oh, it's a 3 bar.
Yeah.
And I'm not, I mean, I don't want to lie. I do sometimes write it, but I try to feel like if I know it that well, then like you say, in your skin, then I can be everywhere else, right? I can be worried about everything else. And so Kathy's system, when I got to actually conducting like an orchestra and not prompting, but actually doing, kind of running the whole ship, it was invaluable for me to just be able to be in all those places at once,
Yeah.
and it is like splitting your brain so that you can, and that's why then, to go back to what we were saying, if then I have to also put a post-it note on some music, it's like it's just all kind of happening at the same time.
The funniest, like, it was so weird for me, like when because I came up on the opera chitlin circuit, and
I
and
remember
we just didn't have prompters. Yeah, I just didn't have.
right.
And the first time I got we had a prompter in the room, I was like, I can't do this. It's crazy. And once I got used to it, it was really great because it really did allow me to sort of turn off that panic part of my brain. When you reach down for some information and it's just an empty well, you're like, where's that? Where's that next phrase? And the last time I had one was doing Nixon in China and Germany, which was great to have somebody
I
there.
would say you definitely would want a prompter for something like that.
Yeah, because you have those crazy, like, you can't tell where the pulse is half the time if you're not, really. And so having that person say something, but the problem was she had a German accent. So
Right.
I'm like, that's not the right. Oh, that's right.
That's what you meant to say. Yeah.
Gotta turn on my German brain now.
Well, what's funny about what you said is that I would say the hardest thing I had prompting was at least half the singers didn't want to be prompted.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it really does screw people up. If you are not, I remember doing shows where, you'd prompt people in rehearsal and someone would say, "Am I late?" And you'd say, "No, no, no, you're not at all." "Well, why are you saying my line there?" And I'd say, "Well, that's how prompting." And then they're like, "Well, I've never had a prompter before. Please stop. You're driving me insane." But so what that means then as a prompter is you have to remember who you're not prompting.
Oh my
So
God.
now you have to prompt, I've practiced the whole thing. I used to sit in my house and you have a salt shaker and a pepper shaker, and they're each different characters, right? You practice kind of pointing to that one and pointing to that one and saying the lines, and then suddenly the pepper shaker doesn't want you to do it, right? And so you're like, oh man.
We'll just take this and put it
Yes. So, and I remember my first couple of shows thinking, but I practiced it that way. But then of course you realize, well, it's not about me, right? I'm there to help. I'm not there to, it's not my show.
Yeah.
But it was a bit of an adjustment. So yeah, you're right. I think a lot of people, if they haven't used a prompter a lot, it's really confusing.
It's bananas.
It's a bizarre thing anyway.
Yeah.
I
don't mind it now. It
well,
just makes
you probably sing in houses where it happens all the time, probably.
Now, more often now, not all the time, but it's once I got used to it, and it's like, oh, it's just a security blanket, So you have these like diverse musical interests that sort of manifested itself in heavy metal, and all this stuff, and then you ended up in the opera world. But the idea used to be that if you're an opera singer, you're an opera singer.
Right.
You're a classical musician, you're a classical musician. You have done not just classical music, but also Broadway musical theater. And that's a completely different. Is it a completely different world to conduct that music, or is it more similar than it is different?
Well, I would say that there's sometimes I say they're exactly the same, and so as an art form, I find them to be similar. Like, I think about it like I have a story, I have a cast, I have an orchestra, there's music, right?
Right.
The only thing different is the style, right? I wouldn't conduct Handel the way I would conduct Wagner any more than I would conduct Wagner like I would conduct, a Broadway show.
Les Mis, for instance, the one you
and Les Mis, which is a show I did. You wouldn't do, and also you wouldn't do Les Mis like you do Sondheim, and you wouldn't do Sondheim like you do Cole Porter. Like it's all, to me, it's always all about style.
Yeah.
So, and that's why I kind of love doing so many different things. Like if I were to go back and play in a metal band again, I would hope I wouldn't be playing it like Mozart or something. You know what I mean? It just doesn't, to me, it doesn't make sense. Right. Exactly.
This is headbanging to Mozart.
Yeah. Just exactly. But it would be wrong. And it would be, so for me, it's about approaching each, from an artistic standpoint, approaching each thing as it is and as it was meant to be and what the style is.
Yeah.
Just like I said, just like people do in classical music all the time with the variety, I just have a wider, you know, group of things that I dabble in. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? My
Yeah.
styles are my boundaries are farther apart, I guess.
Yeah.
And I kind of love it that way. So yeah, so I do a lot of Broadway as well. When you said what's different about them is the business end of it is very, very different. Number one, none of the same people do both. I mean, I'm really, I don't find, there are a few, but I don't know many
Yeah.
people. You know, you see designers, directors. There are absolutely lighting designers who do both. Set designers, costume designers. Some directors do both. But when it comes to musicians, and especially meaning conductors, you
Yeah.
don't find that many that kind of do both. And so for me, I feel like I have to keep two separate lists of people to contact and to stay. You know, I have my circles. They're very separate. They're
Yeah.
not the same groups of people. And then of course the business model is very different. Meaning, you know, you do Broadway for a while and you really are down. You're a member of a team and you're down on the list.
Yeah.
So there is at the very top of commercial Broadway. There's at the very top. There's a producer
Mhm.
who is in charge of everything, who tells the director what to do, and the director would tell the choreographer and the music director and people like that what to do. So it's more the director's vision.
Mhm.
And so absolutely a director can come up to me and say that feels too fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which you would never hear in an opera house.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
In an opera
Or if you
house,
do, it's definitely everybody goes.
yeah. No,
It just happened.
I feel like I put on a different hat. Like I walk
Yeah.
into a room and I kind of like, oh yeah, today I'm that guy, right? Today I'm and I've been doing both simultaneously. I mean, there were many times that I'd be conducting an opera and at the same time I do some supervising of tours. Like I supervised the Phantom tour that was out, that just closed before the pandemic. I was
Oh, with Emma?
with Emma Grimsley. Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
man, I
And,
love her.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And and I actually went out and conducted it for a week with Emma. So that was really fun. Yeah. And so when I do that, like I'd be doing an opera and then maybe on a day off from the opera, I'd like hear some auditions for Broadway. And then I
Yeah.
have to remember, I don't actually get to choose this. I make, in the Broadway world, I make my recommendations. I say, here's why I wouldn't use this person or whatever. But at the end of the day, it is the director's decision. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day of that, it's the producer. You know, usually the director has to present his choices to the producer, depending
Yeah.
on who the producer is. So you find your slot and you kind of go, okay, here I am. And then there's this incredibly beautiful thing when you go back and work in an opera house after having done a musical for a long time and everyone's calling you maestro and bringing you coffee and like, can I get you anything? Is everything okay? And you're like, why is it so nice to me? Yeah, it's a shocking adjustment to get used to that kind of treatment because it's not that way on Broadway at all.
Don't you feel like with certain, like in opera, with like certain directors and things, and even singers, that like sometimes you can get that sort of level of sort of the director being able to say, hey, I think it's a little slow and things like that. I mean, for me, that's when I really feel like I'm doing theater. When I have a whole team of people, the director, the conductor, and everybody on the stage, and it feels like there's much more like you're on the same team. Everybody has more of an equal voice in what's going on, and you dispense with a lot of this hierarchy and a lot of this hat tipping and things, and you're really able to dig in and get way deeper than you can if you're afraid of transgressing some sort of weird protocol.
It goes back to what you were saying about collaboration and stuff. I have almost zero interest in all of that.
Yeah.
I could, the whole protocol thing and the whole bowing and this, and you know, even the fact that in the rehearsal room the conductor's often sitting like on a little elevated platform, like it's all weird to me, you know. And
let me approach you, sir.
Well, and you know, I find it happens to me sometimes when you're in the middle of a production and you'll bump into someone and it's, often a young singer. And look, I get it, because when you're a young singer,
Yeah.
there are conductors who are
We'll
different.
correct you at the library.
And that I'm not criticizing anybody, but I will say that it has happened to me where, like, I'm in a supermarket and I'll bump into someone from the cast and they'll say across the supermarket, "Oh, hi, Maestro." And you'll be like,
Oh,
what a
is
weird,
Jimmy Levine here?
it's just such a bizarre cultural thing. It
Yeah.
reminds me of that Seinfeld episode where the
I
guy,
was going to fix to say. Please.
that's why that was funny, because the guy demanded that they call him Maestro, even on the date with Elaine. It was like, "Call me Maestro." It's just bizarre. So for me, it makes me kind of feel awkward. But again, then I always realize it's like young singers it's drilled into them.
Yeah.
Better not say something. And there are conductors out there to whom it's very important that
I didn't go to 8 years of maestro school to be called Mister.
Yeah, exactly. So having said that, I do think there's a lot of directors that I've worked with long enough that they feel perfectly fine coming up to me and saying that feels too slow.
Yeah.
And it's happened, and like, the pianist will often go, "Oh my God, did the director say that?" And I'll think, it's fine.
Right.
Maybe it was too slow, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not perfect.
There's timing and there's a moment, and a moment on stage. I have run into sometimes people that are a little intransigent because they're like, no, it's got this relationship to the other thing, and it's got to be this way. And if you change this tempo, it's going to change the previous 12 tempi and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but there's a story happening up here that's got a certain.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's theater, right? I mean, it's a story, and the music is there to drive or to help tell the story or to something. And so if your answer is, "I'm doing this because my academic study told me so," that's not really a good enough answer. I always go back to, I remember when I was really young, when I was a pianist, and I was a serious pianist, and I went to a piano competition, and afterwards one of the judges asked me why I played something a certain way. And like an idiot, my answer was, "Well, my teacher told me to," which is the worst answer, right? Because we've all, by now have had 100 people that we might refer to as teachers or mentors or people. And you're distilling all of this information, and you can't just you can't just hold on to one thing that someone told you. And so so if your answer, I remember doing, and I was a pianist on a production, and the conductor, it was exactly what you're saying, was dogmatic about a tempo in a Handel opera and in Ariodante, and it was like, this is the tempo, and it wasn't comfortable for the singer, and the coloratura didn't work, and and it just wasn't sitting right. And he refused to change, and it just sat there. They sang sometimes like a 30-second off, and he just allowed it to stay there because, damn it, he wasn't going to change that. He wasn't going to allow her to have any kind of freedom.
Yeah.
And okay, here's a story that sticks with me, because so I was when I was on the staff at Houston, I was quite a bit mentored by Patrick Summers, who's the music director there. And there was a time he probably wouldn't remember this, but there was a time that I was conducting the Tenderland there. And I was conducting a rehearsal, and the singer was behind me, and I was young. And so, well, I wasn't that young because I started, but I was very young in my development. And I was so frustrated because and it was just a rehearsal with piano, but the singer just was going slower than I wanted to go. And I, in my kind of macho, like, I'm going to impress Patrick, right? And I said, "He's driving me nuts. He won't be with you." And Patrick just said, "Why don't you let him breathe a little? See how that works." And it was not the answer I expected, because what I wanted him to say was, "You're right, damn it, that singer ought to follow. You're the maestro," right? That's what he expected. And he gave me this answer, which was, maybe he needs a little more space.
Yeah.
And so the next time we went through that phrase, I gave him a little more space, and it worked out beautifully. And I didn't lose anything. It wasn't like I lost points in the game of, like, I gave up something. It doesn't matter. All we're going for is the same thing. And that sticks with me, because it was this idea of, it's not always my way or the highway, and it can't always be the way I planned it in my little study room, when I was preparing the score in my head. Like you make a movie in your head, and it's never going to be that. And that goes back to what we were saying about your cast is your cast. You have to come and meet them where they are and say, these are the strengths of that person. And you try to exploit that,
Yeah.
and not make them sound uncomfortable and not make them sound worse. And so that singer who didn't even know I was having this whole internal struggle with them, suddenly it sounded better.
Yeah.
So I have no ego. That's why, going back to, if a director leans over and says, hey, or a choreographer, that happens all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or any way to go slower there.
Yeah.
Or faster, whatever they need. And you think, I don't know, let's try it. And you try it, and it's like, sometimes it's a no, but sometimes, most of the time, it's like, yeah, that works. Spending this past year really made me. So one thing I've been doing a lot during the pandemic, I was lucky enough to get some work where I was doing a lot of orchestrating and arranging and, kind of.
Yeah. Well, like with Songbird. Holy crap. You
So
tore that
exactly
piece to
like
shreds and put it back together.
what we're doing here in Glimmerglass. And so that kind of work, I've always done it, but when a pandemic hits and you're home the whole time and you realize, oh, this is a thing I can do from home, and it's like, it's just something that is a nice option for either between gigs or maybe one less travel gig and I do this. You know what I mean? And it's like, how can I spend more time?
Let's talk about Pericole, Offenbach's Pericole, which we've retitled Songbird. Yeah. Now, like when you get approached about something like that, there's, I mean, yeah, in the abstract, you go, because it's, and I'll let you talk about what you did with the score and how the different influences you use to sort of change the music and still preserve the spirit of the piece. But like when you do something that's that sort of off the wall, in the abstract, you go, yeah, this totally works. But then like you have to really, like, it must be exciting to be where you are now at this point, to have seen all of that, deconstruction and reconstruction actually locking into a piece that changes daily. Like I get emails every day, like these are the text changes, and it's like a list of text changes for the show.
We're basically creating a new musical, is what we're basically writing a show. But so the process, what happened, because right now is a really cool place to be, what you talk about. So for anyone, right at this moment, I have now had both orchestral rehearsals. So I've gotten to hear everything. We've had pretty much all the cast. We've had tech, we've had piano run through. So we just haven't kind of finalized it. But it didn't always feel this comfortable. So when I first got called to do Songbird, so what Songbird is, if anybody doesn't know what we're talking about, it's La Pericole by Offenbach that they moved the production to the 20s in New Orleans. And then they said, hey, we've got an idea. Why don't we also change the music to fit that period? And the original question was, can we orchestrate it for a band that would have been playing in a nightclub in the 20s in New Orleans? And those bands would be Louis Armstrong had a band called the Hot Seven, and Jelly Roll Morton had a band called the Red Hot Peppers. And there were many examples of those kind of bands. And they're basically a rhythm section, piano, bass, drums, banjo, which we have. So that's the four that we have that are the rhythm section. And then what they call the front line of a trumpet, a clarinet, and a trombone. And so that's it, 7 instruments. And then we have added 2 percussion to that plus timpani to kind of add some drama and make it a little, but basically that's the nucleus. So and now it's 10 players. So that was kind of the initial idea, was if we go into that sound world of, if you take this music and take it to New Orleans, that's where we started.
Because this is French Grand Opera.
Right.
So how did you go from, like, I don't know how big the original it must have been 80 pieces or something.
It's a big orchestra. It's a big chorus. So one of the first things that I noticed was that, of course, we don't have a big chorus. We really have a cast of, I think, 11 or 12 maybe, who all are more individuals rather than a chorus. And so that was kind of the first thing we did, was we said, well, you don't want to go out there and apologize for the fact that we have a smaller chorus and
Right.
sing all these kind of block chords, monochromatic. So what we did is anytime there's a chorus, we made it more like New Orleans music, which is individual voices. Somebody pops a line, someone pops a line, kind of like this collective improvisation where it's like everybody has a different line. So that was one of the first thoughts we had, was that anything that's a group number has to be a group of individuals rather than a monolith of a chorus standing there. And then we had the discussions of, okay, are we okay with changing rhythms to swing or to syncopating rhythms and things like that? Those were kind of the early days of discussion. And the answer to all those things was, yeah, let's do that. Let's take it. So things that might have been da 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 become da 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 da. Right? They have kind of
it's got a ragtime feel to it. Like I had a friend who used to do like parodies of operas and ragtime, and there's a couple of those moments I'm like, oh yeah, there it is.
Well, yeah. So in the 20s, what the reason French Grand Opera kind of works is that New Orleans actually had several opera companies at the time, and French opera was kind of so that singing, it's not all that far away.
Yeah.
When you pair the orchestration down to that group and you start thinking about ragtime, vaudeville, all these march bands, right, and the parade bands and things like that would play. You start to it starts to actually morph pretty easily. It starts to actually work pretty well. So what I did is I listened to literally hundreds of, I just kind of took a week and just dove deep into everything recorded from the 20s and before. The first jazz recording was 1917. And
that's fun homework though.
Yeah. Oh my God. It was a blast. And so I was making notes and keeping track. And then what I started doing was I started paring it down and saying, all right, this number in the show, for example, where Picchio and Songbird and Pericol are performing. And my first thought was, well, what would they have been performing? Probably vaudeville. So I kind of immediately, that number, it exists in Pericol, but it's a duet. And it's a little more classical, but it is a performance that they do. And so my first thought was, well, that would be vaudeville. So I started going through and thinking, what rhythms do I need? How do I write the piano part to sound like vaudeville? We've got all kinds of little sound effects, little splash cymbal chokes, little things that make it sound vaudeville. And then we went from there. And so I started trying to find like a model song for each song of the show.
Yeah.
So for each aria, for each duet, for each thing, it was like, well, this is kind of ragtime. It's like a medium ragtime feel, or this is maybe a scat. We have a scat solo because.
Oh yeah, that's right. I remember that. I was like, wow, that's super cool.
I said, well, can we write a scat for this guy? He's an opera singer, and it turns out, yes, we can.
No, you absolutely can.
I wrote to him and I said, how would you feel about this crazy idea? And he wrote back and he said, I used to sing with jazz bands on a cruise ship. And I went, well, you're my guy, right?
Great.
So we went nuts with that, and so I started kind of. I would send Kelly Rourke, who wrote the libretto, and Eric Sean Fogel, who's the director. I would send them like, what do you think of this song for this aria? Like this vibe, this feel. So we started getting specific. And that way I had a model of kind of what maybe character or what vibe we were going for. The hardest thing of the whole thing is that Pericol has tons of waltzes. There's like a lot of 3/4 music.
Yeah.
And
we all know what a waltz does in a set list.
Well, yeah,
just
right.
The breaks on it, baby, straight down.
Well, I'm not kidding. I listened to, hundreds of songs from that era, recorded songs. I don't know, hundreds might be exaggerating, but it was a lot. And I didn't find one song in 3/4 time, not one. And after a while, I was searching, I was trying, I was going down lists and, trying to find anything. There might have been some, but I didn't find them.
Yeah.
And so I finally, I would say about 4 numbers in the show, I actually morphed from 3/4 into 4/4.
Yeah.
Which meant either adding a beat somehow, but still getting it to feel right, or actually, something that was a 3 thing in a melody became like quarter note triplets across, or some way to get the accompaniment to feel New Orleans, but the singing could still feel like Offenbach.
Yeah.
And what's weird is that now when you hear it, I don't know if the triplets just feel like like something a New Orleans singer would have done. Like it to me,
Yeah.
it sounds more New Orleans than it does Offenbach. And I think that's what we were going for. But that was the hardest thing, was the dealing with the waltzes. And even now, there's still probably 5 or 6 sections that are waltzes, whether they're in like the more recitative or the scenic kind of music. There's a bunch of kind of 3/4 stuff. And just yesterday, the drummer, we spent half the rehearsal yesterday sitting there with Greg German, who's our drummer, and saying, how can we make 3/4 or 6/4 or 3/8 feel like New Orleans? And he was brilliant at coming up with ways to kind of play ragtime on the snare drum and the rim the way they would have back then, but it's just in 6 instead of 4. And so, yeah, we were kind of creating that in the orchestra rehearsal together. And
In a weird kind of way, this project does represent a lot of what, it's sort of representative of who you are as a musician. Because I mean, like, how many times as a conductor do you really do that with an orchestra in an opera house?
Yeah,
like, just let's just change some stuff, man. Like, hey, baby, just go with me,
drum writing is one of those things. I mean, in a Broadway show, the drummer usually comes to a lot of staging rehearsals. Like, you'll have kind of like a continuo would be at a Baroque. Like, if you're doing Handel opera, you might have the lute, the theorbo player and the cello player there in the staging room with you. So a lot of times when you're doing a musical, especially with dance music, you'd have the drummer there, and then you'd have all those weeks to kind of work out. Because drum notation, it's not like you can just write out a part and make the drummer do it.
Yeah.
Every drummer I've talked to say, you got to find the fine line between giving me just enough information so I know what you want, but not so much information that I can't find a groove and find a way to make it feel good. Because otherwise they're just reading notes on a page in it. So it's like it's a lot of slashes in their part, a lot of improv. So you're kind of, and a lot of adjectives. You're telling them kind of, this is the groove we want, this is the feel. And this goes back to what we said earlier, they can help. You got to trust your drummer to be able to bring what they can bring to the table.
Yeah.
Right. So that they can say, this would be better than that.
Right.
So I notated what I thought was best, but I told him from the start, you can take what I wrote, but throw it away a little. And so that never happens in the opera house.
No.
But it's a really common thing in Broadway to sit there and talk to the drummer and try to find what is that thing. And then once it's codified, then you have to write out a part, because then if that show goes to another production and another drummer, you want them to know what it is.
Yeah.
So I was actually, yesterday, he said something about, I would call that a slow shuffle.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, you call that shuffle? And I wrote it down because I was like, someday I'm going to have to put the word shuffle in the score, because hopefully it would mean something to a different drummer.
Yeah.
But yeah, that doesn't happen in opera house very
No.
much. So,
like, what are we going to do here, man? What do you think we should do here?
yeah. You don't get to say to like the cello, like, what do you think? It's pretty much on the part.
Yeah.
So this project has actually been a blast for me because it kind of combines everything. We've got these great opera voices, and we've got people with their kind of opera phrasing and shaping, and they bring so much to the table that way. And yet then I've got a drummer that I can do that with, and we have a banjo player, and we have, it's like so many different things.
I really think a lot more, like with that Oklahoma they did with the bluegrass and country band.
Oh yeah,
I thought it was genius. I was just like, why is an opera doing this all the time? I mean, it's so, like, I was on number one, the reimagining that Fisher did with our Fishman Fisher. I can't remember his last name.
Fishman.
Daniel
Fish.
Yeah. The reimagining of the story that he did, still staying true to the story, but boy, putting a lot of subtext in there that I had never thought about before.
If I'm correct, I don't think they changed one word of
no.
It was just the way it was
man. It was. I saw it at Bard when it was getting workshopped.
Oh, before it.
Oh yeah, and I love Oklahoma. I love those old classical musicals. That's what I want to do too. I'm always like, who wants to do Oklahoma or Music Man, or I'm doing Sound of Music later. I'm like, all the things my parents love. Can we do that, please? Yeah. But I remember, like, I remember walking in and being like, oh, it's Oklahoma. I'm going to like this. And by the end of the show, I was like on the edge of my seat, like I was watching a true crime documentary.
But see, that's what's so great about he was willing to just take a classic and reimagine it. And of course, in that case, he had the blessing of the Rodgers and
Yeah,
Hammerstein estate,
yeah,
because
which must have been
you can't,
hard.
yeah, you can't just change something that's not
No,
public domain like that.
no.
Obviously, with Offenbach, we had
That's why
no.
it makes a lot of sense for opera. Like I've been trying to pitch a bluegrass opera forever, and people are interested at first, and then it's just like, well, how do we execute? And it's not something I really push too hard. But like with opera, you can do whatever the
But
hell you
why?
want because they're all dead.
Well, so first of all, that's exactly right. So from a legal, like, logistical standpoint, it's completely easy. We don't
Yeah,
have to ask anybody.
yeah,
In fact, the joke has been, with every cut that we make or every change that we make, I've often made the joke: do we need to check with the estates? Do we need to check with the? And I'm like, oh yeah, it's just me. Okay, yeah, sure, we'll make a cut. Like, you don't have to. You don't have to. You just ask me, and I'll do it.
yeah.
But I love the bluegrass idea. That's
Oh
something
yeah,
that,
it's one I love the I don't know if it's an original, if it's something we should do with an original piece, or a reimagining of an old story like Romeo and Juliet, but in
well,
West Virginia.
when you think about, I mean, that's actually what I'm kind of loving about doing something like Songbird, is that it works. Like, hybrids can really work, and there is no reason why you can't have. This is something I talked to the orchestra about yesterday. There's no reason you can't have rubato in, like, New Orleans jazz from the 20s. Like, it's some places Isabel Leonard is like taking time and floating on the note, and you know what? It sounds just like if it were Clarence Williams playing with Bessie Smith. Like, it's the
Yeah,
same, like it's the same kind of. Sometimes he would wait for her, right? And sometimes you keep the groove and you let them phrase over. But the point is that there's no reason that the two styles can't blend. It
yeah,
just means that at times we have to kind of give a little rubato for the singer to have the line, and at times it's about the groove, and at times. So it's like, I'm really interested in the hybrid thing too, because I think that, number one, uh, people want to hear. I mean, the voices that are in the opera world are. We want to hear that,
yeah. And
But
they all have different capabilities and styles.
right,
Nobody I know was like I said, you in kindergarten wanting to be Toscanini. That didn't happen, and I wanted to be Willie Nelson, Johnny Cash, or George
right.
Jones. And so we all have this other side of us that is often just kind of sitting there waiting to be exploited. And it just takes the right people to go, hey, why don't we just use this?
It's
They can
actually
do
amazing
both.
how many people you meet in this business that have another interest musically. Like,
Yeah.
many people, like
Opera's
that.
just my day job. That's what I say.
I mean, when we started planning the concert, this musical theater concert, I
Yeah.
remember we were talking about, like Ali Shiner. We were like, does she belt? Is she going to be willing to do this?
Yeah.
And the answer, it turns out, does she belt? It's like
Yeah.
unbelievable.
The answer wasn't yes, it was hell yes, and watch this, hold my beer.
Right. And who knew? Right. And I actually had written her some emails saying, are you okay if we do? Because I didn't know her, and you
Yeah.
just never know. And she wrote back and said, these songs are all my childhood dreams. These are my favorite songs in the world. Absolutely, yes. And still, I didn't know until I heard her do it. And then I thought, oh my God, like, yeah. So to have people that can really, most people can. People
Yeah.
grow up. It's like dancing. There's more and more opera singers now that can dance, that can move.
Yeah.
It's
There's a
just
tap number.
we have a tap number in
Songbird.
Crawford, right? Go
Yeah.
figure. So yeah, I mean, it is something that, I mean, Glimmerglass has always been kind of in the years past. Glimmerglass has always had a group of musical theater singers that are there for
Yeah.
when they do a musical, but also sing in the chorus of the opera. So there becomes this kind of blending of cultures, and they all kind of learn from each other. The musical theater singers are watching the opera singers going, I don't know how you do what you do.
And
The
vice
opera
versa.
singers are watching them saying, I don't know how you do what you do. And then by the end of the summer, they've all kind of grown a little.
Yeah.
And this summer, just due to the pandemic, we don't actually have those people here this summer. That's not a group of people that ended up coming, but yet so many of them still have that in them.
Yeah.
And we've been blown away by also that musical theater concert, how much pretty much everybody has something in their back pocket you didn't know they had.
Yeah. Aaron's piece. What's it?
Sky from Pippin.
What's
Aaron
that?
Crouch. Is that what you're talking about?
Aaron,
Or
the Aaron, I forget his last name. Tenor Aaron, I forget his last
yeah,
name.
yeah, Aaron Crouch.
Yeah, yeah, Aaron Crouch, and he
Singing,
sings that.
singing Corner of the Sky. It's
Yeah,
incredible.
like I don't know that piece at all. I don't really that style of musical theater. It's not something that really like I dig into, but it's the piece that I leave singing in my head, and then I wake up the next morning every day. That dude's got some serious, and it's not like I mean, it's impressive the way he sings it, but it's just the feeling behind it is so intense that
He
it
gets
just imprints
he
on me.
gets
I
the
can't
meaning
stop
of
getting out of my head.
Yeah, he gets the meaning of it, and
Yeah,
he gets the style, of it.
yeah.
And so I am with you. I'm all about that kind of hybrid. If there's a way to combine styles, or I mean, I also compose, and I've been really wanting to kind of compose pieces that are somewhat that you could do in a musical theater house or in an opera house, right? That you could do both. That requires good opera singing, but has a certain style. You know what I mean? That these
I'll
pieces
tell
that
you what, we'll call dibs on it right now.
let's do it. What do we?
Bluegrass opera, we got that. So nobody jump in our pool.
Yeah. Anybody listening, if you don't touch
We
it,
called it. We
yeah,
called it.
this is it's copyrighted now. I think it's a great idea. I
Dude, I
think
think you've made a fantastic. I mean, it comes from the diversity of your musical tastes and your background, but that's a pretty convincing argument. Not just with Songbird, but just what we've been talking about here for the hybridization of this art form, because you can still bring when you do that. Not only do your hardcore opera people who know this who already know the pieces back and forward, they discover something new, and it's surprising and interesting to them because they know the skeleton upon which this new thing is hung.
yeah,
But
yeah.
also people who don't know jack shit about opera or the
Well,
conventions and all that stuff, they hear a style and a music that they're familiar with, and it automatically knocks down this big barrier and hedge that we have between ourselves and the audience sometimes of this
that's kind of
concept.
my goal is to kind of honor both, right? Neither one is it's kind of like if you're an opera fan and you come, what I hope is that you'll still get enough beautiful lyric singing that exists in the show. And if you're a jazz fan or a musical theater fan and you come, you might walk away going, I can't believe how moved I was by those voices,
Yeah,
right? Like that both sides get something from it,
yeah.
and that you kind of wherever you're coming from, that you come away with some appreciation because we've tried to honor and be respectful of all of the genres that are blending.
But I'll tell you, I hope that anybody who's in the industry that's listening to this and that might have been reticent about sort of revealing their secret passions or whatever. I mean, go for it. I mean, you're a perfect testament of somebody who can do that, and that's why I really wanted to have you on the show
Oh,
because
thanks.
there's not anybody that I know really that has that sort of bravery and this fearlessness really just to be like I don't care. I'm just going to do what I'm going to do.
Well,
So
the
I
whole
really
thing
appreciate it.
started out with if I do many things, look how much I'll work because I'll be so busy doing this, and this, and this. It didn't totally work out that way. I'm probably exactly as busy as anyone else, but that
Yeah,
was my original thought was, well, I can do all these things. I'll just say yes to everything.
yeah,
But I think that what young singers often don't realize is that the creators of opera often, meaning the not just creators but the creative teams,
hmm hmm
often want to know of all of those other skills that you have,
yeah,
right? And it might not be in something as far reaching as Songbird, but even if you're doing a bohème, like if you're Chonard and you have an acting background, bring it, right?
yeah. Please do, especially with that
If
role.
you Yeah, I mean, if you happen to, whatever you bring to the table, even if we're not going to specifically have you sing like Sondheim
Yeah,
as Marcello, right? I mean, obviously we're not going to do that, but if you have a certain kind of stylistic panache about you, don't hide it, right?
yeah,
Directors are always wanting to know, can somebody bring something else to the table?
yeah.
How much variety do you have in what you do? Because it will always inform what you're doing. you
Well,
know.
Jim, I want to thank you so much for coming on, man. Because if there's ever an argument, if there's ever a case, a test case for breaking the bonds of genre and breaking down those walls between genres so we can have much more cross pollination and really be able to reach out our arms and pull in a whole other community, it's you, brother. So
Yeah,
thank you
well,
so much for coming on the
thank you, I
show.
appreciate it, and I hope we can do it. And seriously, bluegrass opera, it's going to happen.
All right, we called it right here first.
All right.